I kind of imagined that getting published would be kind of transformational and life-changing.
Yeah.
And I'd probably sweep down a marble staircase with a dirty martini in a white suit to rapturous applause the moment the book came out, you know. And I wasn't kind of aware how low-key publishing generally is.
Yeah.
You know, I've got an idea for.
Something, Joe.
I've got an idea for the next standalone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you give us anything? So, Joe,
Hello.
how's it going?
So good so far, but it's early. We've just started.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. For the 3 people who don't know you and haven't read your books,
The sad people. I feel bad for them.
can you tell us, just a little bit about how you got into writing? Obviously, it was something a little later in life, and
Yeah. So I was working as a TV editor at the time, and that gave me a lot of time off. I was very good at the job, obviously, but I was freelance, so I'd have a job for 6 weeks, then I'd have a couple of weeks off, and then a few days on, a few days off. So even if I was busy, I had a lot of time on my hands, and after a while, I felt like I needed something a little bit more productive to do than just playing video games with that time. And I'd had in mind for a long time to try my hand at writing a fantasy series. I'd loved fantasy as a kid and in my teens, and then kind of drifted away from it as an adult. But then someone gave me Game of Thrones in the late 90s and said, you should try this. And I thought, I've seen this before. So there's nothing new to offer.
Yeah.
There's a knight, there's a king, there's a magical land in peril.
yeah.
Dragons.
Come on, man. And of course, I got quite an eye-opening thing.
Yeah.
At the time, I don't think you can really get across now how sort of revolutionary it was in terms of the kind of shocking twist, the brutality with the characters, and the character-focused nature of it. And that really made me feel, okay, you can do something kind of exciting and visceral and dark and very character-led and still it be really recognisable kind of epic fantasy.
Yeah.
I'd love to try something similar,
Yeah.
really. So that was like a big moment in a way. And the idea sort of sat there until the right time happened. I had time on my hands, so I thought I'll give it a try. And that was how I started.
Yeah.
Just sat down in the darkness after midnight, tapping away on my old computer.
And what was the time frame from when you had that idea to when you actually had finished?
Well, I started writing it actually in my 20s. I'd had a go before I read Game of Thrones, like way back, because I did a psychology degree, so I had no skills of any kind. And I thought I need to learn to touch type as I enter the workplace. So as an exercise, I'll write this epic fantasy novel I'd always thought I'd do. And it was pretty terrible. It was worse than even the finished product is. But it was very cheesy and pompous and kind of
Tropey.
very tropey, exactly so. And then after Game of Thrones, 10, 15 years later, after a bit of life experience, taking myself probably a bit less seriously as well. When I first started trying in my kind of late 20s, it had a totally different feel. It was the same scenes, it was the same characters largely, but there was just this kind of world-weary tone to it and a kind of tongue-in-cheek tone to it. And straight away I started to just become kind of interested by what was coming out. And it seemed to have a life outside of me in a way, And I just started to get fascinated by how you write a scene, how you come into a scene, how you structure it, when you use dialogue, when you use internal monologue, how you pace, and how it was similar and different to editing, a scene in TV where I was working at the time, how some of those kind of rules of how you pace something and what transfers and what has to be different. And I just got really interested in what was coming out, and the experience of kind of going over and revising and re-editing. As a TV editor, you redo things a lot. That's what that job is.
So you
make a
prepared that
sequence.
already, weren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very used to sitting with someone and them saying, no, redo
Rewrite
this. Exactly. They tell this joke about editors, which is how many editors does it take to change a light bulb?
Yeah.
Does it really need changing?
Right, okay.
And so,
okay.
as an editor, you're used to doing endless changes. And so that was the sort of mindset I had as a writer. I started writing and then I'd go over and over and over it. And I was sort of just experimenting with what worked and what didn't.
Was that just the first book then? That you kept going over and over and over, but you planned a trilogy.
That was the Blade itself, Or it became the Blade itself. Didn't have that title at the time, so it was just the thing I was working on. And although the front changed quite a lot later on, basically it was the same scenes, the same characters.
So was
same
it
ideas.
the first one you wrote years before? Was that the same idea?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So did you have that idea a long time ago? Then, was it a case of you've had an idea for a book that you want to do, and then you had a go at it, and you thought, "Well, I did this terribly," and then 10 years later, you thought, "I'll do it better now."
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to say I had an idea is doing me too much credit. It's very self-consciously a take on classic epic fantasy. Lord of the Rings, kinda.
Yeah.
With a different voice and a different approach. Right? I mean, it's David Eddings, Belgariad. It's kind of all that classic fantasy stuff. That's really what I wanted to do. And so, I'd had the ideas for characters for years. I played a lot of role-playing games in my teens, and so, drew a lot of maps. Yeah. I had a lot of ideas and names and things that were there. And, as I got older, the world got more, mature is the wrong word, isn't it?
Yeah.
But got kind of older, more adult.
Yeah.
And, so Glockter was quite a late addition to it. Because he was a much more kind of, I suppose, adult, political, offbeat idea for fantasy. And so more of a character coming in from thrillers and westerns and sort of invading the fantasy idea as I went along.
As well, I think.
Very cynical, exactly. Like and reading Game of Thrones, I'd always been interested in a lot of that cynical stuff. So the LA Quartet, James Ellroy, that was quite a big influence on me, and that's ultra cynical, kind of dark, violent fiction with very damaged men. And in fact, LA Confidential is basically 3 very different policemen coming at a mystery kind of from the angle of their own obsessions. You've got one kind of used up violent guy, one old cynical guy who's been broken by the system but still with some little streak of goodness left in him, and one new young ambitious guy who doesn't really understand what the world is yet. And so I don't want to say that I stole that idea, but there are some superficial similarities. But I just like that idea. It's, fantasy is often quite like a scientific paper. Like Lord of the Rings structure is, Gandalf explains what the experiment is going to be. Here's the experiment in the apparatus. We're going to take the ring to Mordor, and that's how it's going to work. Then they do that, and then it ends with Gandalf saying, okay, so we did that, we took the ring to Mordor, it went in the mountain, and there we go. It's quite kind of, you know exactly what you're getting from the start, and you get exactly what you're told you're going to get, more or less. Yeah. Not as a criticism, that's just quite a straightforward structure, and a lot of fantasy has followed that rule.
It has, but I like the fact that one of your books was, everything that was supposed to go right didn't. It was supposed to happen, and it was, and even though I was by the third book, I was expecting, right, he's going to turn this trope on the head again. Yeah. And then when you did it, I was like, oh my God, he's done it again.
Well, I love failure.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant. I'm speaking to a friend of mine, he said, I've finished the second book, and can we do spoilers? Well, we're going to do spoilers. I got to the end of the second book, and they didn't find the seed of the long journey. And I was like, I know, wasn't it great? Yeah. And they're like, but no, I kind of want them to find the seed. And I was like, no, but I love the fact they didn't find the seed, because that's you don't see that in fantasy, and you don't see that in this genre. And I love the idea of being almost disappointed by it, and like enjoying being disappointed by it, because that's how life is sometimes. You go on a big journey and it doesn't end well.
Well, fantasy was super tropey in the 80s and 90s a lot of the time, so it kind of felt like to do something non-tropey was maybe more exciting than it's become. Now I think, not to say everyone's doing it, and it's not just fantasy, is it? I mean, things like, The Sopranos and Deadwood happened and did similar things with those genres, where they sort of broke tropes and had much more cynical kind of takes on the material. So I wanted to take that kind of mystery structure and apply it to fantasy, where you don't really know what's going on, but you just gradually discover it through the quite limited point of view of the characters that you're following. Yeah,
I like that.
Fantasy from the point of view of the little people.
Yeah.
Rather than the big people.
Yeah. It's close-up fantasy, isn't it? I really like that,
Yeah, tight close-up.
You still get world building in it, and I love, that's great, but, everyone talks about your characters and how they jump off the page, and, and they absolutely do. My wife absolutely loves it for that.
Spaghetti Western compared to John Ford, Tolkien is the John Ford with the huge...
big wide
the angle. Big country and the little people in the far off distance, and then Sergio Leone's the big sweaty close-up of the eyes.
Yeah.
Eyes of the men staring at each other, and I wanted to do fantasy.
Look how broken they are.
More that, exactly. Look how broken, how leathery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love those chapters in Age of Madness. You mentioned the little people.
Yeah.
You have multiple chapters called The Little People, and it kind of jumps from different perspectives of people that you just never get the perspective of in kind of historical fantasy. Is it tough to write when you're just jumping from character to character? Do you build any backstory for them, or do you feel like, it's just in the dialogue, you're going to create it, and that kind of leads to the next person and the next person?
So, I started doing that in the Heroes, and I think I've probably got a little bit carried away with the device. But it's kind of, it worked so well at the time that I kind of felt like, man, I can't not do this now.
Yeah.
And in the Heroes, it was for a very specific purpose, which was, the Heroes is a story about one battle, and it's very focused in time and place. And I was trying to kind of get into the nature of what a battle's like and how kind of tiny things can have these huge impacts as they sort of ripple out through this ludicrously complex, unpredictable interaction of hundreds and thousands of people. And so I was trying to, with fantasy, often you get this kind of great man approach where Aragorn will lead the charge and that will turn the tide, and his action of hitting a guy with his sword at a given moment will save Gondor, right? Whereas often in battles, it's not like that. Individual actions have no effect. People do stupid, weird things. Mistakes happen. Charge of the Light Brigade because two men basically despised each other, or three, in fact, in the chain of command, and they would never have acted that way if they hadn't hated each other. So the way the kind of personal relationships can affect the whole thing. So it was kind of individuals caught up in the struggle, some of whom might have a huge effect, some of whom have no effect.
Yeah.
Huge personal stakes sometimes, petty little things that they do that have terrible or important consequences. And so it served a real purpose, and I love that idea of, starting with one character who's then killed by someone else, you follow that character. It's kind of a filmic device in a way.
But you care about those characters. You never killed off so many characters I've cared about in a single chapter.
Oh man, you gotta love that. And there's always more. That's the brilliant thing.
Keep writing.
I think, as far as what I'm good at as a writer, I think, I'm quite good at getting a voice for a character and giving each character a voice and giving them a set of concerns, and I can paint a character quite quickly, I've found.
Yeah.
And so it very much played to my strengths, doing it that way.
Off that, isn't it?
You can set a character up instantly, you can kill them off and then not have to worry about any sort of plot closure or development.
Yeah.
You can paint someone very quickly and then forget about them and never have to worry about them again.
Have you ever killed someone off
arc.
because you're worried about, how do I finish his story or their story? You ever thought, I'll just end their lives?
No.
Solve that problem.
No, because the death's got to be for a purpose and to illustrate.
And they mean something.
Yeah, I think you can get a little addicted to death for shock value, and there are more interesting things you can do with a character. I think the problem you get often if you kill people off a lot is whose story is this?
Yeah.
So I feel there's often more interesting things you can do, but you've also got to kill people to create that sense that things aren't
Nobody's safe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is important to do. That trick works well for me, and generally it'll be, trying to balance different voices, different types of people, different ages, different attitudes within a given set. So with that one in the Heroes, you've obviously got two sides, one of which is the Union, more cultured, more developed, more advanced country, and then the northern side. So you naturally get an alternation of those different types of voices. But you have people high in the chain of command and people right at the bottom and kind of idiots caught up in the mess who don't know what they're doing. And generally, I don't really think about them much in advance.
Yeah.
They're one of the kind of sequences I'd plan least. So, in terms of planning, it'd probably be, I'm going to do one of those sequences here.
Yeah.
And then future me can worry about the details. And then when you come to do it, it's kind of, right, what action are we covering? What's the approach going to be? How are the different bits going to join together? What do I need to cover and what sort of characters? So with Age of Madness, it's a book about industrialization and changing society. So they work, I was reluctant to use it again, but it just works very well to give you a kind of slice through the layer cake of society and see lots of different people and, you know, how life is changing. Yeah, see a lot of attitudes. And, you know, something like a big riot is just a great device to make that work. And you can also follow the characters, you know, through the eyes of these extras, I suppose you might say.
Films like filmic though, doesn't it? Yeah. Those sort of scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
From one to the other.
Exactly.
Get that pace in there.
So I've always liked that thing of, you know, you're in someone's head, you have a certain idea about what they're like, and then you see them from outside, and there's a kind of disconnect, and it gives you a different feel about who they are. Being a video editor, do you actually see it more cinematically as you're creating it? I don't know if I do, and it's hard because I don't know how other writers see it or think about it, or how I thought about it before I started editing. But I suppose I think about an action scene in terms of details and bits that you want to show in the way probably an editor might. Yeah. You know, if I was editing an action scene, I'd be focused on a detail, a spray of mud, a flash of steel, you know, that you put together in order to create that sense of movement and motion and kind of excitement. For me, an action scene, you want the reader to feel like you want the experience of being there. You know, not that interested generally in following the back and forth of the sword techniques. Yeah. Often, I mean, if you are trying to write from the point of view of a master swordsman, you might be considering that, you know, because the master swordsman has that level of expertise. But if you're following a raw recruit, probably the language he's even using about the swords is going to be pretty basic. Yeah. The master swordsman might know the difference between, you know, a hunting sword or a scimitar or something. Exactly, So he'd be using all the correct terminology and maybe thinking more about technique. And likewise with a battle, the general might have now they're moving in on the flank, or, you know, that kind of thing. But inside the battle, it's just absolute nonsense. Inside the battle, it's chaos and mess. Exactly. And that's more interesting to me. Yeah. Like, what's it like for the characters? What's the emotional kind of resonance? Really do you have to do research for that sort of stuff? Because I know obviously writers do loads of research. I always hear about that, you know, like. So for battles and for the Age of Madness, not just the battles, but the industrial stuff, were you digging in and out of, you know, stuff to try and understand what, you know, try and make it as realistic as possible? Yeah, I mean, most of what I read is non-fiction of one kind or another. So, Age of Madness, I used to read loads of military history, and so I've kind of absorbed a certain amount of that stuff. I mean, at the same time, you don't want to be throttled by the research, or with research, often you're looking for telling details that are interesting. Yeah. You know, so I read Frederick Engel's Condition of the Working Class in Britain, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend as a quick read, but it's full of, well, first of all, it's kind of saturated with a certain attitude of how people were thinking about class and kind of the development of industry and the change of working practices in Britain, which is of the time, you know, and is very different to how we think about it now, and that's fascinating. But also it's full of details of kind of what the Victorian slums were like. One thing, for example, they were full of pigs. Everyone kept pigs in their front yards, in these tiny terraces and things. And you'd toss the scraps to the pigs, and then in winter you'd slaughter the pigs and you'd eat them. Brilliant. And you'd probably smear your kids in the fat and then stitch them into their shirts and all that kind of stuff. Right. No. But the point is, the slums were incredibly noisy with the noise of screaming pigs all the time. And, you know, that's the sort of detail that you never think about. But it's in fact like crazy. Like, the experience of being there must have been intense, so wild compared to, you know, what life is like now, so different. And, you know, descriptions of the rural poor and the terrible state. We kind of think of, you know, the industrial slums and the cities in Manchester and so on as being the nadir of humanity, kids up chimneys and so on. But I mean, they were there because the rural poor was so much worse. You know, it was appallingly primitive and bad prior to the Industrial Revolution. So, you pick up a lot of stuff, and gradually that all goes into the kind of the knitting together of what's going on. So there's one character in the Age of Madness who's, you know, has traditionally been a sheep farmer. He's been away to war. He comes back, and that whole mode of life where they graze sheep on common land has all collapsed, which kind of happened much more slowly and gradually than exactly. Happen, though, But that was kind of happening, you know, in that period in Britain, and people were kind of being pushed into industrial centres, and so that's what happened to those characters. And that gives you some ideas for what their path through the story is and how they might be employed as they go along.
It was really nice to see the almost like an industrial revolution or a revolution of sorts within a fantasy story. I think sometimes the world largely stays the same. It's fantasy land and it's all fantasy now. And whereas actually to see that change, and obviously changes like that have happened many times over human history, to actually see that sort of being brought into fantasy novel, I just thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always been a sort of interest of mine as well, in that, as you say, fantasy worlds are often kind of pickled in aspic and sort of always eternally the same, like Middle-earth hasn't. You don't feel forging techniques have changed in millennia, you know.
Exactly.
Whereas, and in a way that means that conflict has to come out of abstractions of sort of, here's the evil guy, here's the good guy. Whereas, of course, in the real world, conflict arises out of these kind of tectonic changes of economics and
it forces the change.
Social change and so on. And so that gives you all kinds of natural conflicts within the world you've got, you know, rich against poor and the sort of upper class against the lower, rising power of money against the old power of land, and all these things sort of become natural fault lines you can.
People are dealing with the change, basically. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's the macro effect on it rather than, just the character interaction. But thought it was really, really cool.
So you wrote in kind of a different progressive time period from one trilogy to the next. If you continued on beyond that, maybe. Would you see yourself going into more modern time periods, or do you think you'd still try to keep it, relatively kind of historical?
It's an interesting question. I mean, when does it stop being feeling like fantasy?
Become sci-fi.
It could be urban fantasy.
And I mean, there's already people for whom the Age of Madness is a step too far. Like the industrial stuff is not their cup of tea. You know, they want it to be a bit more bucolic and Middle-earthy. You know, that's what they're signed up for, and they don't really want to see that. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like kind of personal firearms, rifles and pistols and things. It feels like a point at which it has maybe gone too far.
Steps down a bit, a little bit.
I mean. So
it does, doesn't it really? You know what I mean? You've got magic and someone's got a gun. It's like, well, the magic doesn't matter so much.
There might be the interest
I've got a
there.
rifle.
And I mean, there's obviously the people who do kind of flintlock type stuff very successfully and so on. But that feels like a step I don't massively want to take. I mean, I've sort of artificially suppressed gunpowder in that world. You know, they're only just getting cannons now, and obviously socially they're vastly more advanced than that. So I think I probably wouldn't go that far, but the overall plan is really, it's a world that magic is gradually moving out of. And so I think if I did further books, it'd be magic returning gradually, and the kind of collision between that and the forces of modernity and economics and stuff.
I like that, it's almost like it's coming back, and maybe it takes it back in terms of how advanced
to a more primitive age. I don't know. Well,
no lasers though. No lasers.
Well, who knows? Maybe lasers. Maybe lasers is the way it goes. Space lasers.
Space lasers.
I can imagine Bayaz like calling upon a space laser.
Absolutely.
This meeting's not going well. Hello.
Is that a phone? How do you know it's a phone?
When you've built kind of this whole world, sort of in the background of the Magi, and you sort of know what they're doing, but not quite. You're letting us know a little bit more with each book, it seems like. But is it even important to really know what's going on, or is that not the point?
Is that the difference between soft magic and hard magic? Because I always felt yours was quite soft, right? And
it is, but I think it's more, are you with the little people or are you seeing the big picture kind of thing? And but there are people who are very upset about the fact that, well, hold on, what's happening with all this stuff? Because I turned up to see the end of that story. I want that story finished. And to me, that's it's kind of missing the point a little bit. I guess I'm much more interested in the sort of individual stories that happen of the people, as they go. And
it doesn't have to be the same stories, the same characters. I mean, you kept a couple in from the first. But,
no, exactly.
It's too easy, I think, sometimes just to finish that one off. I would have thought, but it's nice to actually see the progression of new characters.
And the Magi stuff is sort of the backdrop of that, and it's in a way the eternal backdrop of the social. They sort of represent the social forces that will never go away. So sort of people say, when will Bayaz get his comeuppance? And it's like saying, well, when will capitalism get its comeuppance?
Exactly.
I mean, maybe it will in a way as things change and shift away, but I think probably not. And not every aspect of it wants to close off in my mind. Fantasy often going back to Lord of the Rings again, because you can't really discuss it without talking about Lord of the Rings. It's got a very neat end. It ends with total victory, change of the guard, the old age passes and a new age will begin. There you go. Whereas real history doesn't have those moments, It does have those moments, but they're inevitably false, like George W. Bush declaring victory on his aircraft carrier. If you end the story there, well, that feels like an end, but we all know it's actually not one, because, the seeds of the next issue, the next thing are totally planted and already growing often, even when that happens. So, I like a world that feels like it's sort of in constant flux and we're just seeing one snapshot and a story of a set of individuals kind of within that structure. And, the world doesn't end, the world's always there, just like our world continues. It's just the nature of it changes and the stories of the people in it reach an end.
Probably don't even know when things actually have ended until many, many years.
Only looking back do you sort of, do you impose a kind of false idea of an ending on the things,
Some might describe you as cynical.
Some might.
Do you think, how much of that is your own perspective on the world? Or you've created this world, it's clearly a harsh, hard, pre-industrial world. And that's just the nature, that is what, truth is in that world. But, are you trying, not that you're trying to say something specific with these books, but is that filtering in your own personal opinion, or do you feel like that's just kind of part of the world you're creating?
I think it's a reaction to fantasy more than anything else. So, especially with the first law, fantasy, traditionally, things like David Eddings, and they're very heroic. They're not only out of characters who are, who have positive, virtuous attitudes to the world. They want to do good things. They act in a noble way, and they achieve noble. They triumph over evil. It's pretty straightforward in that sense. But also they're heroic in the sense that they matter. They're hugely important. They'll change the world. They truly are the chosen one. They're the axle about which everything spins, And so I kind of want to challenge both of those ideas and have people who are like Glockter, who, in a way, you could see him as achieving very heroic, very noble things, but his methods are definitely appalling, and his motivations are pretty questionable. Or then you have a character like Jezal, who looks very much like a hero. He's a very classic chosen one type of guy, but his motivations are pretty seedy and self-serving. He's a pretty small. He's a coward. He's a small man. And does he achieve anything? Well, sort of mixed on that. Hard to say. Or then Logan is a guy who, on one hand, does have some noble ideas, but also you find out he's pretty appalling in other ways, and certainly does some pretty appalling things. So I just wanted to pull that stuff apart and kind of see how it works and try different things, I suppose. And I guess my attitude to the world has become more cynical over time. Maybe in the 80s, when I was reading some of David Eddings' stuff, say, the Cold War was happening, it was a bit easier to believe in a kind of world of white and black, of good and evil. That was sort of the prevailing feel. And these days, I guess we feel we're much less trusting of our own leaders. We feel much more doubtful about the world. There's not a lot of Aragorns around. That doesn't feel like a kind of faithful...
No Gandalf the White.
No, Gandalf doesn't feel like a faithful demonstration of what leaders are really like and how power works. And these days, if a Gandalf came along, you'd be like, oh yeah, you're going to save us here.
Gandalf, would they?
You wouldn't really believe Gandalf, would you? Or you'd certainly have your doubts. You'd have your worries. So I suppose it's cynical because of those things, but at the same time, I'm not kind of utterly cynical. I think people overstate how cynical it is.
I think it's actually more, it's just actually taking fantasy in the realms of realism, or actually, I don't see it as overly cynical. I see it as more clear view of what the world is actually like, or what the world.
Clear-eyed realism. Absolutely. I'd like to say, if there's a message, I'd like to think it's not, there's no point, everything's terrible. The message is, it's very, very hard.
You have to be realistic.
It's very, very hard. You have to be realistic. Exactly. It's very hard to achieve change. It's very hard to change the world for the better. Not that it's not worth trying, but that often people fail. It's just not straightforward.
More grey
simple.
everywhere. There is a lot more grey everywhere. And I think that's the distinction made. I think what Song of Ice and Fire did well was that sort of dual motives. People have got good in them and bad in them, and I think.
And there's grey of many kinds. I mean, it's not even necessarily they've got good and bad, but it's hard to even identify what that is. I mean, I often think Song of Ice and Fire is not really any more. The characters aren't any more grey than Tolkien's ones, but in Lord of the Rings, there is a right and a wrong. There's a divinely ordained right and wrong that no one really doubts generally. So like to resist Sauron is righteous. To give in to Sauron is evil.
Bad,
right? And it's simple. Everyone knows that. Okay, so sometimes people can be blinded temporarily.
On top of a tower. I mean, that's pretty bad.
He was giving the game away, wasn't he? Really?
Exactly.
But I mean, everyone knows that, and therefore. People don't tend to doubt what is the right thing to do.
I think I like it when you don't really know who you're rooting for. You're almost rooting for both sides because you can empathise with both sides of a conflict. And I think that feels really refreshing.
Well, Eddard I don't think he's a less righteous guy than Aragorn. In some ways, he's a more honourable guy, but he's presented with a world where he doesn't know what the right thing to do is. Or the right means to use, or who's a good guy or who's not, who he should be allied with or not. And it's just a much more difficult world to navigate.
Yeah, the obvious.
And often,
evil dudes.
A kind of white hat guy within that very, dark, difficult world, the things that make him honourable can be the cause of his downfall as well.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Do you plan out character arcs? Because I'm thinking of Age of Madness in particular. There's some characters that start out pretty despicable and get a little better over time. Some that seem like, this is going to be kind of the great protagonist that maybe devolve a bit depending on circumstances. Is that something that just you look at the narrative and say, well, if this person with this personality was in this position, this is naturally the way they're going to go? Or do you plan kind of a greater character arc?
Wasn't the first trilogy more like people were becoming better, they were changing, and then they just evolved back to people don't really change. And that's what I got the feeling from it. And again, that was really refreshing because it was like, here's another redemption arc. But it was like the redemption arc is gone now. And you must have planned that.
Yeah, well, I mean, a big part of it was, people in fantasy often change and improve, and Aragorn discovers the strength to be the great king that Gondor needs, and Frodo does actually backslide a bit, doesn't he? But Sam kind of he claims the ring in the end. People often forget that. He turns bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
He goes Team Sauron.
Yeah. But, Team Sauron, exactly.
But
Sauron was right.
Sam discovers his courage and his strength and so on. So people change in these kind of, more so the kind of fantasy of the Eddings variety. People change and improve and grow, and they learn to be a great man, And it is usually men.
That's true.
So I suppose I've just always been interested in people who don't necessarily achieve the change, or achieve change in some circumstances and slide back in others.
Well, they try, and the world doesn't almost resists it.
Yeah.
And so they fall back into that.
And an alcoholic often can move to a new town and start a new life and join up with a program and come clean for a couple of years, and then some life event pushes them back into the same patterns, and those patterns are always there, very easy to slip back into. So I just wanted to kind of explore that, I suppose, in a fantasy setting.
That was cool. I was kind of a bit frustrated, I think, especially with like Logan suddenly, I think it was becoming king. Yeah. We all were coming back to the Northmen, that sort of reassessed or re-pushed him back into his old ways. Yeah. And you almost feel he was a bit frustrated with that, and but it was nicely done. And I think the same with Giselle as well. He's like, I'm going to get married now. This is great. I found a woman. It's like, you're king now. And he's like, well, I'm king now, and never mind.
You move on, don't you? You move on surprisingly quickly.
Yeah.
But I plan them. Sometimes I plan them. So the first trilogy, a lot of this developed just kind of out of nowhere, and then afterwards you say, wasn't I clever? I was definitely doing that all along. With the Age of Madness, a lot of them were quite planned in advance, and I'd kind of drafted the whole trilogy before we published the first one, so I could get to the end and then say, okay, so the arc for this character is this, and then I could change the front to, Savine, for example, who you may be thinking of, starts off very ruthless and self-serving, and then, has a chastising experience. which actually makes her more ruthless and self-serving because she's kind of determined never to be in that spot of being weak again, you know, being vulnerable again. And then she shifts to kind of a slightly more outward-looking, more philanthropic attitude. But then when she gets everything she wants, maybe she starts to shift back towards a more ruthless thing. So, you know, she's kind of shifting slightly. And when I finished those books, I was able to kind of calibrate that a little bit more. And there are other characters who obviously start in a very classically heroic mold and then end up in the role of the villain, but you know, they're kind of forced into the role of the villain almost despite themselves.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to see how readers respond to characters after the fact, because I mean, there's one character in Age of Madness who's way my most hated character, you know, and I don't find him that repugnant. I mean, he's pretty repugnant, but he's not to me. This is Leo.
Yeah. Oh, Leo. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
To me, he's no worse than. He's
exactly.
far better than many others. He's much less self-serving. He's kind of has slightly noble aims, but he's a bit of a klutz and easily manipulated. And people, it's always interesting to see what can readers forgive and what can readers not forgive.
You've been surprised by that sort of reaction sometimes. To some characters.
Yeah. Well, they can forgive anything in someone who's funny.
Yeah.
They're funny.
What's
they're
been the
self-aware.
reception that's been most different from how you expected for a character?
Well, I'm kind of surprised how much people love Glockter and Logan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because to me, they're utterly despicable, right? But they seem... Well, Glockter seems awful from the start, so that one's surprising, but he's funny and he's self-aware.
Yeah.
And you're very close to him in his points of view, closer than anyone else, because he has this internal monologue that you can kind of... It's like him breaking the fourth wall almost, really talking to the reader. And so he can get away with anything, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a torture of everyone's like, oh, yeah, so he is. Oh, I really like Glockter.
Logan comes across as a nice guy in the start, and so you can kind of understand why people still have this warm feeling towards him, you know, even after he's revealed to be appalling. But then someone like Monzo, who to me is, ends up in quite a positive place, and he realises probably done the best they can with the hand they're dealt on the whole. Yeah. Still, people really don't like her and find her unpleasant, but then maybe that's the standard they apply to women as well, is often very different. So. Male characters get an easier ride.
Yeah, you might be right with readers.
Is it harder to write female characters for you than male characters? Or
I mean, certainly to begin with, which is why there aren't any in my first trilogy.
Nobody really said that before.
No, I mean, I really like I think there's some brilliant female characters in the first Lord, both of them. Actually, both the female characters that are in it. I suppose I was writing a lot of, fantasy, classic fantasy has a lot of male archetypes. There's not a lot of women in Lord of the Rings.
No, there isn't.
True.
And, they tend to be quite secondary in things like, David Eddings and that we've talked about before. And so in exploring a kind of wizardly mentor and promised king and a used up man of violence, they're very male kind of archetypes, really.
You had those tropes to take down first, right? And then they
sort of. But I think also, you're right, what is obvious and in easy reach often to begin with. And, if you're a man, you spend a lot of time in groups of men. You probably don't spend time in big groups of women. How those interactions work is a little bit less obvious and you're less confident on that ground generally. And so over time, I've tried to, write a lot more women and a lot of different types of women. And I started in a way with Best Served Cold writing quite a masculine woman, operating in a very male world, which is kind of interesting of itself in some ways, but she's still recognisably quite similar to some of the male characters. Age of Madness, I think the female characters become a lot more varied and kind of, Savina's obviously a very feminine woman in a way, but who operates in a very feminine kind of sphere, which is interesting because it's very different to the kind of male stuff. And Shattered Sea, I very deliberately designed those books so that there's a kind of male and a female sphere, both of which kind of can produce kind of interesting characters who are affecting the plot in, significant ways and so on. So I think it's something I've got better at. It's something you're always working on.
Men get a lot of flack, don't they? There's a subreddit, is it men writing women? Yeah. It's absolutely the general amount.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have to speak? Did you run stuff past? I know your wife's a writer. Obviously, your editor. Did you have to run stuff past? Like, am I getting this right? It sounds. I don't know. Is that the right kind of thing? Would you do that? I mean,
not Probably
women think
not
like this?
explicitly. I mean,
No.
people read. So my editor's a woman, obviously, and you know, my mum reads my stuff a lot, and my wife, and so, but I wouldn't kind of say to them, does this paragraph about periods ring true or whatever?
Right, yeah.
Probably. Yeah. I mean,
you can read up on that anyway. I just wrote a book about it.
Well, women's experience of periods is very varied anyway. Having looked into this fact, but it's but you know. It would come up as part of the general sense of, is the book working, is the balance of the characters working?
Right. Like
some people working better than others. Yeah. So it's something you just got to keep working on and asking those questions, I suppose.
I think it was a massive success for them, especially the final trilogy, Age of Madness. I think the female characters are fantastic.
And there's always some male readers who, you know, I think women are used to reading lots of books about men.
Yeah.
Any woman who reads a lot of books is going to have read a lot of books about men with male central characters. Very used to seeing male characters, whereas I think there's quite a lot of male readers who will read 1,000 Tom Clancy books, you know, and are not really used to seeing female characters at all, really. And for them, it can be quite
doesn't make any sense
off-putting.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Which is, I mean, kind of surprising to me. You do get a certain kind of, you know, alpha male type reader, let's say, who, find the old concept
yes.
Female characters a bit strange.
They're out there, aren't they?
you can tell when someone's such a massive straight alpha powerhouse because they have no interest in women.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Always interested.
Ugh, what's this?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite character you write and one that you kind of don't look forward to, or maybe it's just more difficult to get into?
Yeah, I mean, there's ones that work just straight away for no reason you can really understand.
Like who?
Well, so Costco was always,
he's great.
You know, even from his first,
I love Costco.
First appearance as someone relatively superficial in the story. Just, you know, he just owned every scene somehow. And he was always just effortless to write from his point of view somehow. It just worked very well. And I mean, a lot of others have worked really well very quickly. And then often the ones that are more central are more difficult. I mean, so a character like Friendly, say, he's kind of a one-trick pony, and it's a good trick, and it works well within the you know, the balance of the route.
You can't go too far in there, could you?
No, he's not going to bear the load of the plot on his shoulders and make the big choices that affect how the story's going to go. You know, so Monza is directing the story, and you know, is very much the engine of the story, and is also going to have to change and develop as you go along, and your understanding of her as a reader is going to have to change as you go along. And that's a much bigger, more complicated task. Yeah. So you can have a guy who loves numbers. And that's a good gimmick. And that's easy to write.
We're in a Bly is another one who's just a brilliant character.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and he's not even a point of view. So, you know, you can have kind of a good gimmick and they're fun when they appear, but the ones who, you know, are making the plot go will usually need a lot more work as you go along and rewriting and rethinking to kind of get them right.
Is there a character that has the most Joe Abercrombie DNA in them?
Well, they're all me, aren't they? they're all me.
No, I know, but...
That's the weird thing.
Yeah.
None of them feel like me.
No. Yeah.
I mean, especially when you get to the end, you know. Well, there's elements in common.
Yeah.
But when you write dialogue between two characters, that's basically just me talking to me. Which is kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really weird.
It really is weird.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel that way because they kind of start to develop their own voices, and over time you refine it more and more.
It's kind of like the D&D thing again, really. Almost you put yourself into different characters, you know, sort of skins, and then what would this person do in this situation? And it's maybe not what you would have expected.
It's like acting.
Exactly.
It's kind of like acting in a way. So I don't know who's more me than others.
Yeah.
None of them feel... Well, I mean, Swarbrick, the writer, is obviously the kind of authorial self-insert, right? The snivelling, lying writer who kind of, is very easily swayed by his own self-interest. That's me inserted into the book, for sure. Prancing around in his red suit in the trials.
Yeah. There are so many of the characters, whether it's Casca or some of the North, you know, the characters in the North have these, you know, just funny little sayings that almost seem like it would be something that we would all agree, oh, that's like a colloquialism that we all use. Yeah. But they're fabricated, you know, for that world.
Yeah, fabricated or slightly ripped off in one way or another.
Is that, I mean, are those things that you kind of gather throughout your life and then apply them to that, or do they just come to you while you're writing?
They're usually things that happen writing, and will just be an offhand thing. So I mean, when I very first started writing the book that became The Blade itself, you have to be realistic and you know, better to do it than live with the fear of it and never have too many knives. They were just sort of observations that were made in passing as appropriate to the scene. And because I started off going over and over things and rewriting things, I started to kind of notice lines that seemed to work really well. Give a sense of the character and kind of give a sense of the culture and a feel for them. And so, you know, then they became these repeated motifs, and that sort of seemed like a good way to get into the personality of the person. And obviously, you know, they sometimes provide great opportunity for a punchline of some sort as well. So, you know, Logan probably says you have to be realistic 1,000 times, but then the last one is he'd never been that realistic, you know. So you get the opportunity to kind of set up the expectation and then pay it off in the long run. So it just always made sense to me as a... But some characters do it more than others as well. So Logan has loads of them. Because it kind of fits this sense of him having...
He follows these kind of, you know, these...
He's manufactured an identity.
Do you know what I mean? These ideas.
Yeah, he's manufactured an identity for himself where he's almost having to constantly tell himself, this is true, isn't it? Isn't it? It's like, you have to be realistic, don't you? He's almost, you know, it's like the alcoholic trying to tell himself,
you know what I mean?
it's worth not drinking, it's worth not drinking, it's better if you don't drink, it's better if you don't drink, endlessly. So it works for him, and others, you know, maybe less so. You try and think of some other trick that's going to make the writing feel individual to each person.
Yeah. One of my favorites is... I think it's truly life is the misery you endure between... What is it, dude?
Life is the misery we endure between disappointments. Yeah.
Is that kind of... Does that just capture the...
I don't know. I think that, as I say, clear-eyed realism, as I was saying earlier.
That's true.
Yeah.
As you had expanded into, you know, the standalones and then into Age of Madness, obviously you had to make this choice of how much am I going to rely... Because it's close enough in time period to have some characters kind of drift over into the next books.
Yeah.
When you were thinking, you know, there's this balance you're trying to, I would guess you're trying to come to between fan service of let's just keep using the same people over because people will love that just inevitably, versus, you know, I'm sure it's hard to take some of those characters and put them in the background, but it seems like you struck a good balance between letting those characters still be around, but not driving the story. Was that something you
so you're definitely something you're kind of trying to strike the balance, as you say, in the same way as you try and kind of strike a balance of the types of people you've got in your central cast and the ages and the voices and, you know, get different
you don't want 3 more
social classes. You don't necessarily want like 5 old white guys. You know, you want to kind of vary them a little bit, different types, different ideas. And so, I suppose you're trying to balance everything in the book, one way or another. Remind me of the question.
Huh? Oh, well, just...
Having the characters from the
previous, so obviously...
there's the balance. I found it was nice to have some in there because quite nostalgic in a way, but yet they weren't really key or that key to the plot or the way it moved forward. But I also know you can go overboard probably with that and give, as we talked before, give people what they want. You know, just do... Getting Logan back in there, where the hell is he?
Yes.
Whereas actually it was nice to see some of them and actually still have some influence in it, but yet still focusing on this. It still felt like a new story, but it was that nostalgia kick of like, oh, there he is. You could,
or even just hear, you know, we know that, you know, this person's over in that area and is doing something, so you get that little. That's
you could
nice.
probably, you know, I could probably get a publisher to buy 10 young Nine Fingers books, but they wouldn't be very good, I don't think. And it's diminishing returns. Like, people always say they want more of that thing, but actually when they get more of that thing, then it's not quite what they wanted. So you have to tell people what they want. And often, you know, everyone wants something different. So, you know, some people find Age of Madness, they don't like the cast and they'd prefer to follow the older characters. And that one is a particularly... There's a lot of characters coming back and there's a lot of people who are children of characters. So, you know, the old cast does loom pretty large in that in one way or another. But you just try and keep it focused on the new people and bring in the old ones where it makes sense. it's a balance you won't get right for everyone. And obviously everyone likes different characters and different elements.
Yeah.
You know, some people really like the Magi and the kind of ancient history and would love to see a young Bayaz novel.
Yeah. Juvens, let's get Juvens out, shall we?
Exactly. Some people love to see that. But I don't know, I mean, that never seems that interesting to me, you know. It's that thing of when you start mining into, you know, the story of the Emperor in Star Wars is so much less interesting than you imagined it was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, it's better to not know often.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear those stories.
Mythos as, you know, as that historical thing that, you know, they reference, but you don't really know quite what happened. You know, you think you do because Bayaz is obviously evil, but it's nice in a way to kind of leave it there.
That's more fun to me.
Yeah.
That's what the world's like.
That's what the world's like, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't, let's go and see what the gods were like in, you know, 15,000 years ago or whatever, and see what actually happened.
That's why we love telling stories about Julius Caesar or whatever, because we don't really know what he was like in the end, or we know something, but not enough.
Yeah.
So when are we going to get the Joe Abercrombie cozy fantasy novel?
I've done that, haven't I? They're pretty cozy, some of my books, yeah. There's cozy stuff in there.
Keep reading them, so it must be.
I don't know how people would respond to that. It's kind of, once you get known for a certain thing, it becomes quite difficult to do something radically different. And
do you want to do something radically different?
No.
Yeah.
Not really.
This is it. I wouldn't know if you would be or not.
If I did, I probably would. I mean, if I had an idea and felt like, man, this is the book I've got to write, but I don't. That doesn't tend to happen for me.
No,
I don't get it.
He did like a sci-fi sort of like comedy type thing, like tongue-in-cheek thing alongside of it. And I always wonder, you know, do you feel like you've written yourself into a corner in terms of how you write, or is it a case of, you know, actually, I really enjoyed this. This is my style. This is how, you know, this is...
Enjoy is the wrong word.
Enjoy.
Certainly when
finished,
drafting something. Oh, definitely. I enjoy the books I've finished, hugely. It's the writing of them is difficult. But, you know, for me, the ideas are sort of worked up. And a big part of it is, what does the publisher want? What does the audience want? It's not like you're slavishly saying, you know, if some of those readers that I was talking about would rather have more male characters, they'd rather have more Logan testosterone-y stuff.
Yeah.
I don't go, well, they asked for that, therefore I must do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think to myself, well, is this a book that people are going to want to read? You know?
Yeah.
Because the stuff I like often is Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
It's classic adventure stuff just done really well.
Yeah.
You know, I have a great admiration for that stuff, and I see it, brilliant craft of editing and kind of cinematography and storytelling and pacing in those kind of films, you know. So I like barnstorming commercial stuff. I don't see anything wrong with doing that. And so, you know, what people all want, what do I want to write, what haven't I done quite in the same way before? They're all sort of considerations that go into what I'm going to write next and what the idea is going to be. So you're not kind of dominated by the commercial side of it, but no one wants to write a book that no one reads.
Yeah.
You know, and
you write characters so well. I think a lot of readers probably they just want to read more of your characters. Do you know what I mean?
I think hopefully, but it's a career is kind of delicate as well. You know, if one bad book that doesn't work and doesn't sell and that no one likes can be quite damaging. You might never come back from that in a way.
Yeah.
So you know, you're sort of conscious that each book has got to do something interesting and work.
Yeah.
But you want to keep yourself interested and pull readers along, because I think readers always say often they want the same thing as last time, but actually if you give them that, they just get bored over time.
They'll say it's the same.
They wander off.
You know,
or they complain.
Similar story.
He just does the same stuff over and over.
Yeah,
exactly.
The new Star Wars, trilogy or whatever. The first movie, it was like, it was just A New Hope again, and people are like, but you liked A New Hope. You know, why don't you love this? And it's like, well, we've seen.
We wanted a New Hope.
Exactly, yeah, but different.
Not new enough.
Yeah.
So it's a balance, like everything.
Yeah. Look, Joe, very nicely, you were the first person to let me publish a book.
Pioneer.
Absolute pioneer.
Trailblazer, yeah.
And I was a bit surprised that you said yes, to be completely honest. Why did you say yes?
Me too. Oh, well, I mean, so I'd done some limited edition stuff in the past, mostly with Subpress in the States, but a very different sort of stuff, not letterpress. And that developed over time. I think the first books I did with them were kind of had 3 illustrations.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then gradually they've become kind of bigger formats, better paper, more kind of extravagant, the printing and the binding and so on. But this was a real kind of, what you were proposing was a
step
big
above,
step above for sure.
Bill sort of laid the foundations for this sort of stuff. It's how I got into the...
And the market has obviously changed and developed and grown over time. But I think basically, you were the first person who'd come to make a proposal of that kind that seemed like it added up. And it felt like, you knew what you were talking about. I mean, obviously you created that impression somehow. I don't know how you managed it, but the skills of the con man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could say that.
But no, it made sense. And, my agent, we sort of talked about it as well, and it made sense from a business sort of standpoint. And it's always cool to kind of see a new artist take on the characters and the situations, and to see the art is always a sort of thrill as well. It's kind of worth it just for that in a way.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really, but I'm saying that it is.
No.
But it made really good sense, and so we thought we'd give it a try. I mean, in a way, there was not a huge amount to lose. I mean, the nice thing about limited editions is you've written the book already.
Yeah.
So, from my point of view, the vast majority of the work is done. And also, these are quite old books now. They're nearly 20 years old, The Blade itself. And still going strong.
Yeah, it was my head on the block there, wasn't it, I suppose?
Well, exactly. Well, it was kind of, it would seem like a good time. It'd been around long enough that old special editions were ancient and all sold out years ago. So it seemed like a good time to do it. It seemed like not a huge amount to lose. And just a good opportunity to get some beautiful books, really.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people, authors tend to like the proposal, more so than the publishers, because the publishers make some money out of it sometimes, but it's compared to doing a new series with somebody, it's your pocket change. But I always wanted to believe that not every author's the same. That actually some authors are really interested in seeing an elevated version with lots of art and illustrated and beautiful bindings and printing, etc. Of their own book, because it must be. I don't know if I was a writer, I'd love to see something like that. A nicely bound, beautiful version of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this was obviously something, I wasn't aware, honestly.
No, you weren't.
I mean,
I told you how much the letters were.
So this kind of thing, which is the basic one.
Yeah.
That sort of thing I'd seen before, I suppose, though not letterpress. But I wasn't aware there was a market at all for the kind of, the lettered, really limited, high-end stuff. And the prices of them, blew my mind initially. I thought, no one's ever going to pay that.
Yeah, and I was like, don't worry, I'm pretty sure I can sell them all.
And you've basically sold them all already, in effect, haven't you? I mean,
with the ready to play.
So it was an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah.
Because you sold the whole lot in half an hour, basically, didn't you, more or less?
Quick, yeah.
Which amazed me, and I was like, wow, this works. I mean, obviously by that point I'd seen the book, so I knew the product was going to be, far better than I'd ever imagined.
Yes, well, there you go.
I knew the product was going to be great, and so I was confident in it from that point of view, but I just wasn't sure there was the market for that price point. But it turns out that pretty much the sky is the limit on collectible books. And now, of course, you think, well, why aren't we doing sort of £100,000 books carved from a single diamond? And,
exactly,
there's got to be someone.
What made you, go after Joe for the first?
Joe, it was on my top 3 list straight away.
Top 3? What?
Top
there's other
3?
people? There's a couple of others?
Putting them in order.
1, 2, or 3.
I'm not putting them in order. My top 3 were Joe Abercrombie's first Lord trilogy, Lord of the Rings, obviously, which obviously no one's going to get. So that goes public domain. And the third one was A Song of Ice and Fire. Right. It's not finished, so that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't go for it. But and also, you're a British author, and I suppose for me, it's my most enjoyed series. So in terms of I can reread it so many times, and I have read it. I've probably read them 5 or 6 times through now. Yeah. And I just thought if I can pull this off, if I could convince Joe, then I could do a beautiful version of his book. And if he wants a beautiful version of the book, then I think I can do it. I had my ducks in a row. I had my amazing bindery. I had amazing printers. I managed to get the right artist. I think we were talking to Tommy, and I think I was talking to Mark Simonetti at the time as well. Yeah. And it kind of all made sense. And I think being part of the collecting community, I knew that it was possible to sell these books because the people like Suntop Editions were doing this kind of model already, where with an expensive lettered edition, a deluxe, and a standard edition. And I knew there were so many fans who bought those books who also were really into their fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah.
And I knew that actually if I could do that for fantasy and sci-fi, that I'd be able to sell them. I just needed to land with a bang. I didn't really want to start with, a smaller, lesser-known book because I'd worry that they wouldn't sell. And I think I really needed to land, with a bang. And you were, at the top of the list, and the first person I contacted. I actually contacted you before I even did my Ready Player One rebind.
Did you?
On Facebook. I don't think you use Facebook.
No, I don't really check. I don't really check the message. I spew messages out, but I don't really check what comes in very closely. No.
Yeah. So I had a couple of bottles of wine one night, and I sent you a message.
One of those.
I don't think
drunk calls.
I don't think you've read it, so I'm going to read it. It's a little bit embarrassing.
Okay. Nice. Looking forward to this.
Right. Okay. So, hello, Joe.
Hey.
Whilst you may be the self-confessed bad boy of fantasy, I am in fact the self-confessed whipping boy of publishing, a lofty title. I'll be straight up, I'm a bloke with a crappy real job from Manchester who is looking to do fine press versions of his favourite books. Yours feature at the top. I should have said, yours is the top. That's probably why I didn't respond.
So I didn't respond, exactly. Near,
and publish yours. No, my journey has been short so far, but I'm serious about this. I started with a custom published version of Gardens of the Moon, which 2 copies exist, mine and Steve's, as they were technically bootlegs. My latest project has been a rebind of Ready Player One. I put a book in Atari and had some original Atari artists producing art for it. Info can be found on my website. I sold out my first project and really want to move to publishing. 1, I know I can do it and have lots of ideas. 2, I hate my day job a lot.
See, it's very focused on you, this message.
Exactly, yeah.
That's where you went wrong. It should be all about me. It should be all about me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know you did a really cool limited run of the Blade itself and the rest of the first law with Subpress, but I'd love to do a proper fine letterpress, dark and fitting edition with boatloads of art. I won't put it in an Atari, don't worry. Feel free to completely ignore this message. I would. You probably have much bigger fish to fry.
You gave him the out.
I did.
I felt entirely free. And did so.
You probably have much bigger fish to fry. I believe Folio are asking questions. Whilst I may be on my second bottle of wine, which simultaneously gave me the balls to ask the question and will be the reason you said no, I genuinely believe I will do a great job. Anyway, happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend, even though I know the only thing you can do actually is go for a walk. It must have been COVID. Anthony.
Yeah, maybe.
Whipping boy.
Yeah, no, I don't remember that, I'll admit.
Well,
but in spite of that, we have ended up working together. I mean, I think the sort of enthusiasm for the books came across, and I mean also that you want to be enthusiastic for every book that you do, and that you want you want to love the books, the content of the books, as well as the sort of objects you produce, and give some people something that everyone involved can be really proud of.
Yeah, I think I'll only do books that I love.
Yeah,
and I think the key thing for me is that if I love the book, I'm going to do everything I can to make it right. And as long as I have the supply chain, the people in place, and the ideas for it, I think I can do that. But I couldn't take on a book that I didn't love. And so to go through the process with you the first time round, and to sit on calls with you, with Tommy, on the first book, that process, that's one of the best bits of my job really is to be able to have that, because I crave author approval because I love the books and I want to do something that they enjoy, and that's a key thing for me, because otherwise I just hate the idea of, because I know there's some authors who have either had some special editions or some smaller run things that they're not that pleased with, and I just thought that must be really disgusting as an author to be like, oh great, so you've taken my IP, you paid me some money, and you're putting out something that I don't really like the look of. So it was imperative that that you liked it, and it was good but you wanted to be involved as well.
Well, anything that means that I don't have to write is a good thing as far as
it's a nice distraction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The devils can wait another few weeks.
They can wait. They'll get there, regardless.
Is there anything, like, since you've become full-time author, that you've found?
Full-time video games player, and I occasionally write.
Well, you don't get paid for that. Well, you probably could.
Well, maybe.
What have you found most surprising in terms of just like maybe challenges or things you've enjoyed about it, things you just didn't see from the onset?
Oh, I think the experience of being a writer is very different than what you imagined, or what I imagined when I was kind of sitting writing the first book in my spare time. I kind of imagined that getting published would be kind of transformational and life-changing. and I'd probably sweep down a marble staircase with a dirty martini in a white suit to rapturous applause the moment the book came out, And I wasn't kind of aware how low-key publishing generally is, and how few authors really make any sort of living out of it, let alone end up with kind of a sizable profile or anything. And when the first book was published, there was a bit of excitement beforehand. You get a few reviews, you're talking about it. It comes out, maybe you do an event and sign for like 3 old ladies who wandered in to get out of the rain. And then the book goes out there and it's just total silence. It kind of drops into the void generally. I mean, there are obviously books that for some reason have this amazing moment and hit really big, and there's a massive, someone's launched into the stratosphere, but it's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
For most authors, the book gets published, maybe a few hundred people buy it, sits on nightstands for months. Eventually people get around to it. It's a long, slow process.
How does it move forward from there?
Slowly.
You sell some, and then people do some reviews, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have to? Is it a case of going out and marketing and promoting that thing?
I mean, it's a bit different now because we have this internet now. So this was all happening in 2006. I mean, there was an internet, but totally different. No TikTok, no Twitter, no Facebook even. Barely even a kind of infrastructure of forums. I mean, there were a few blogs maybe, but very little. No Reddit. So these days, that word of mouth is just supercharged by those things. If you get someone like, I don't know, Daniel Green on YouTube, or a big TikTok person, or, one reference from them would be enough to get a couple hundred readers straight away, and then it's a huge head start.
They're talking about it, and
Yeah, exactly. And then other people talk about it, and it can kind of, snowball much more quickly than it could then. Back then, it was just long and slow process of,
hoping people picked it up off the
hoping
shelf,
people pick
right?
it up, hoping a bookseller hand sells a dozen copies from a shop and a dozen copies from another shop and a dozen from another, and then maybe you get an international deal, and that helps to kind of push things along, creates a bit more excitement.
Was there a step change at all in did it ever
Third book.
Third book, yeah.
So
it got rolling then, and other people had the closure.
Yeah, so the third book came out. I was at EasterCon when it came out, and it was like in the Amazon top 10 that week, and Amazon was totally different then, and worked very differently. But you could see it definitely kind of was selling way better than the others had been. But it still didn't make the bestseller list. I mean, I think The Heroes was the first one that made the bestseller list. So I mean, it just over the course of the six first Lord books, they just steadily built each book.
Did you find that when you finished the third, that suddenly you was getting more sales on books 1 and 2 then? Because people were like, I've got to finish trilogy now.
Yeah.
Read it,
but then the hardcover pushes along the kind of mass market sales, but the mass market sales are very different kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, certainly from the very blunt point of view of royalty statements.
That is your measuring stick, isn't it, really?
I was paid £10,000 a book for those 3, which is like great by many standards, but it's not a lot of money for like.
Necessarily quit your job tomorrow.
It's not a lot of money for 5 years' work or whatever. But they earned out pretty quickly. Once the second book came out, it all earned out pretty quickly, and then the royalties were like each 6 months. It was definitely kind of growing each time. From sort of this is nice to I could maybe take a couple of weeks off work to focus on the book to. I could actually give up work if this continues, and then eventually, I was lucky because I didn't have to storm out of the office and tell everyone to fuck off. Which I would have liked to do in a way, but
you got the call.
I took fewer jobs gradually, took fewer editing jobs, and ended up kind of working more and more on the books. But I mean, my work rate didn't increase. No. I probably wrote faster when I was still editing, and I had to seize a couple of hours in the night, and then I was really focused, and as soon as I had loads of time, it became very hard to make progress. I had a couple of years after going full time where I was very unproductive.
Yeah. Did you find it hard to suddenly to get up in the morning and like, right, I've got to do X amount of words today, or
really varies.
To do some right. And is it hard to sit down and do that, or are the days when you've had a bit of an epiphany about a scene or a character, and you think, right, I'm just going to get straight into this? Yeah,
there's great days where you come down at 7:30 in the morning, and then before you have a coffee, you think, hold on, I've got an idea, and then you start a paragraph, and then before you know it, you've kind of you've done a couple of thousand words before 9. I mean, that does happen.
Yeah.
Not often.
Not as much as you want, though.
No.
Or as much as Brandon's.
No, way less than normal. Definitely. I mean, I'm much faster at the start of a book when it's exciting and new and the world is full of possibilities. And then in the middle of the book, I'll slow down and it becomes a grind.
Do you feel like sometimes you
and then at the end, you speed up again.
Do you feel like sometimes you lose the book sort of partway through?
I just feel like it's shit.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily lose it so much, but I feel like it's bad and I'm not sure what I'm doing with it. And, you know, there are some characters who probably work okay and some that work really badly, and I feel like they'll never come together.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the end of a draft, you start to feel, okay,
right.
I know what I'm doing
got
now.
Something to
yeah,
work
exactly.
On.
I can see what works and what doesn't, and now I can kind of see what I need to do to...
Yeah.
Usually it means cutting stuff
but
out.
You need to finish it to kind of get to that point, don't you?
Yeah, you do, generally.
But what point does it go to Gillian?
So she's usually very involved all the way through. So Gillian's my editor, and she is kind of, you know, we'll discuss what the concept for a book is generally. So in the case of the Devils, these books I'm doing at the moment, you know, we discussed the concept a while back, and there was a selling period where there was a bit of an auction going on. But once they became the publisher, we talked it through a lot. And I mean, so I'd written the first part was part of the kind of pitch that we used to sell it.
Yeah.
So it was clear basically what it was going to be like.
Yeah.
And so we had a discussion about what worked and what didn't in the first part. And then usually I'll split a book into parts and she'll read it as I go. So that was 4 parts and she read each one as it was kind of drafted. So we're kind of discussing all the time.
Do you find it hard to send something out, you know, in an early stage or are you just in that great working environment with Gillian that it's, you know, she knows that it's an unfinished project and you're finding it?
I'll rewrite a fair bit when I finish a part. So, you know, I'll have a draft. I'll rush through it generally, usually leaving a few scrawled notes saying this is shit.
Don't worry about this bit,
Exactly.
Coming back to it.
And then I'll, you know, spend a few weeks going over a part and revising it and, you know, making it a bit better, fixing some of the problems and maybe applying a few ideas I've had since I started it. And then she'll read that version. And, you know, we've known each other long enough that I don't worry about sending her that. I mean, if stuff is bad, she'll say it's bad. She'll say what works and what doesn't work. And that means that when we get to the end of a book, you know, there's not usually big surprises.
Yeah.
She's already seen, usually the end of the book's tighter than the start.
Yeah.
Because as you're going, you're discussing what works, what doesn't. I'm getting an idea of what I like and don't. So by the time I get to the end, I've usually got a pretty good idea what I need to do anyway.
Yeah.
And she'll have had quite a lot of input too.
Yeah.
In the case of the Devils, my US editor, Lindsay, is also commenting kind of on each part, and we have a 3-person kind of discussion at the end of each part. And so they've had a lot of input throughout, and there's not the same there's not a big structural edit to do usually at the end because
you've done it as it goes.
Their comments have sort of rolled in as we've gone along. But there's a bit of a discussion to be had at the end once we see what we've got, and I bounce ideas off them, and they kind of bounce ideas off me. And
do you ever disagree really on are you all kind of on the same page with what you think works and doesn't?
Disagree a bit.
I'm keeping this in there. You're wrong.
I mean, a bit.
Yeah.
You've got to put the marker down, haven't you?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you've got to let them know who's the boss. Not often. I mean, generally, if they say something's wrong. I mean, for example, right, the end of the Devils, there's a big fight. Unsurprisingly, there's a big fight with a big monster, right? And
it's a very big monster.
There were actually 3 monsters originally.
Right. But you sewed them all together.
Well, Gillian didn't particularly like the way that it worked, and she would rather have had a lot of monsters.
Right. An overbearing amount.
Exactly. She'd rather have had a lot, but I felt we'd had a lot of monsters at other times in the book, and actually one big monster was probably the way to go.
Yeah.
But it made me rethink the sequence, so and it works much better now, and it made me kind of totally rethink how that sequence was working and so on. So the discussion led to a better outcome, even if it wasn't the outcome that she'd necessarily asked for. But then she's never really asking for, she's never saying, right, do this.
Yeah.
She'll say, I've got a problem with this, maybe you could think about that.
Yeah, okay, right. So
and then that's how it works. And so there were a few things she was uncomfortable with throughout and that I kind of persisted with, but made changes to the point where she started to be a lot happier with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you take the feedback on and you find your own solution, but it tells you where the problems are.
And so, I mean, this is probably my inexperience. Editors, do they, obviously they're there to help, guide the book into something that they believe is going to be. So are they the kind of the people who know what's going to work? They're the people who have an understanding of the market and what makes a good book. I mean, compared to say somebody who reads it and thinks, oh, I love that. Is it they've got more of an understanding of the makeup of a book and how it works, and you lean on that then as a writer?
Potentially. I mean, every editor's a bit different and has a different kind of array of strengths, potentially. Some are much more publishers who are more involved in the sort of internal politics of the publisher and how they'd get the resources together to support a book. So, there's an editor, people often think of them as the creative side, which is important, but in a way much more important is they're acting as the champion of the book within the company and kind of trying to energize the other parts of the company and get as much support for the publication as you can, and to plan how the publication will work, how the marketing will work, how the book will be targeted, what audience are you aiming for, how are you presenting it, who's going to sell it, trying to get sort of these days, a subscriber. If you can get a kind of subscription model on board, that's a big step forward, straight away. So there's this kind of dual thing of the creative side and the commercial side. And obviously I can write a book myself.
Yeah, of course.
Quite a bad book often, but with the help from the editor is invaluable. But I can write the book, but I'll never be in those publishing meetings that the editor is going to be in. So in a way, that part of the contribution
you need that person on the inside
is vital as well. So there's sort of there's a lot of purposes they serve, and some editors are great on the creative side and kind of specialise in developing new writers and sort of helping to kind of communicate the basics of structure and storytelling and those kind of things. Yeah. Some editors are much more about building their own list and how they're going to kind of develop a list and what direction they're going to take it in.
Yeah.
So there's kind of all different facets to that job. It's a very complicated job, and in a way they're acting as the anchor point for the marketing people, the publicity people, the production people, and all the different elements of the publisher. They're kind of coordinating it, as I guess you are. When you're putting a book together, you're dealing with the binders, you're dealing with the design side of it. Although a lot of that you're doing yourself.
Yeah, but you're right. Though. I mean, when you hear the word editor, you think someone who physically edits the book, and actually it's clearly much more than that.
Small part of the job, and the other thing is often a US editor, if your primary editor is UK, the US editor won't have much of the creative editing input at all, but they're still doing all those things of how you cover the book, how you sell it, how you promote it, and that's still vital. Yeah.
How did it work in book one then? Because obviously you didn't have an editor when you first wrote the first book, I'm guessing.
Not when I wrote it, no. I mean, originally.
And then did you then go through a process? They said, we think it's great. Can we work on improving it?
Yeah. No, so that was Gillian again. Yeah. It was her first book, and it was my first book.
Oh, wow.
We worked together from then. I mean, so obviously that was a finished book, kinda, so a bit different to the process we have now, where we're working together going through it. But there was a lot of work to do, especially on the front. And we spent quite a lot of time kind of...
Was Logan not falling through the sky in the first chapter?
No.
Right, yeah. Okay.
He wasn't, actually.
Yeah. Because that's a really impactful start. Yeah. I love that start. It's fantastic. And I love that it ends that way as well.
So her thing was your first chapter's bad.
Yeah. Great. Have you read the rest of it?
Yeah. Well, she had read the rest of it. And so fortunately, she liked it. As soon as Glockter appeared, she got into it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of totally redid the front. Dogman was in first person originally.
Right. Oh.
And
so did you have 4 principals then?
Well, it was exactly the same chapters as now, right? But it was just in first person, not in third. And
why was that decision?
I don't know. Just it was a different approach to take, and I was kind of just interested in experimenting with a different voice. And it worked pretty well, actually, but it kind of unbalanced everything and made it seem like he was actually the central character, because once you got that eye in there, it gives a different sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
So we changed that and tried a few different approaches to converting it to third person. And there's a lot of different things we sort of messed about with. So there's a lot of work to do on that book, and then with each book there's been a bit less.
And moved on through.
So you're speaking about The Devils.
Yes.
Which is not out yet. We've all read it here.
Yep.
Yeah, I know, you lucky people.
Most people
what
have
delight.
not.
Perks of the job.
Can you tell us a little bit about just kind of your inspiration leading into that? And for people who don't know, what is sort of the macro storyline?
Well, the inspiration, in a way, was to sort of write a book. These days, that's where the
That's a good place
inspiration
to
is.
start.
I need to write another book. What the hell am I going to do? Is often where I'm at. And it was a sort of idea I'd vaguely had for quite a while. I suppose I quite like the idea of doing something that was in a Europe of a kind, having done a couple of secondary world things. So writing something in a sort of messed up version of Europe appealed to me a little bit. And I'd sort of had this idea about the Pope keeping a set of monsters to solve the problems the righteous are not equipped for.
Yeah.
And so
expediency.
Exactly, the Chapel of the Holy Expediency. So that was the sort of seed of the idea, and then various other stuff got thrown in. But I wanted to write something where I could something like The Age of Madness is a big trilogy that is one story, and you kind of need to write the whole thing in one go and revise the thing in one go to get it coherent and for the start to match the end and all those things.
That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's kind of
Daunting.
quite painstaking, with a lot of interconnections between loads of different threads and a lot of connections to old books. There's a lot to keep in mind. And because I was doing a lot of other stuff at the same time, I wanted something a bit simpler that I could kind of dip in and out of. Yeah. A story that kind of goes from A almost all the way to B, as they say. So it was trying to do something simpler, sort of books that stand alone, a group of characters who kind of you can come back to, more like a set of detective stories or that kind of mode, you know. So that was really where the idea started from. It was the book that I needed at the time, I suppose you might say. And just to write something fun and stupid.
Yeah.
A little bit that, you know, I could have fun with. Yeah. And obviously it was fun for like 3 chapters, and then it became a deadening grind yet again. But reading it's wonderful, obviously. But very entertaining, obviously.
Do you have a favorite? I know you can't talk too much about it because it's not out yet, but do you have a favorite character?
That to me is always a bit like asking, do you have a favourite ingredient in the cake?
Yeah, or favourite.
Yeah.
You know, once it's baked together,
it
becomes the thing, and they all serve a kind of different purpose, and you need the different sort of tones of the different people in there.
Or maybe favorite to write.
I mean, there's no Costco in this one, just to let everyone know.
No, there's no Costco. I mean, Viggo was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I would imagine.
As we were saying about Friendly, it's kind of a gag, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a joke. She's not really going to develop hugely during the course of the story. It's a joke, and it's a sort of very strong voice that is entertaining and quite superficial. But you know, they're a lot of fun to write. I mean, Balthazar's a lot of fun to write because he's such a fool, you know. Yeah. So that's always good value. Someone who's just got an incredibly high opinion of themselves.
Yeah, incredibly high opinion.
And obviously they say write what you know, so that works well for me.
So that's the character, that's Joe.
Yeah, that probably is actually. Yeah.
And where are you at in terms of developing the rest? So I mean, it sounds like you were talking about it almost like you see it a little bit more as a standalone in this bigger world, and not so much a linear trilogy.
Not one storyline that you follow.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like, you know, a series of detective stories, it's basically they end where they start, and each one kind of stands on its own. And sometimes there are a few little threads, like the detective's kid keeps turning up and gets a bit older each time.
Yeah.
But really it's not, you know, you could read them out of sequence and you'd basically still get a similar kind of experience. Yeah. So that's the idea, that the books stand on their own. And, you know, the group changes. There's a priest who supposedly takes care of this group of monsters, and there's a new priest each time.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, so the priest rotates out, and there's a bit of a churn in the group. But you basically
taking on,
there's usually a new voice. So the new one, you know, there's a witch who comes and joins the group, and there's a different priest. The priest is a kind of hapless fool, really, in the first one. In the second one, she's this kind of fervent, zealous lunatic. It's a bit of a different tone. So, you know, each is a bit of a different story and a different type of deal. So this is very much a journey You know, it's kind of pretty straightforwardly that episodic, pretty straightforward, a journey from A to B where they get into many horrible misadventures. The second one's a more complex kind of story that all happens in one place. So it's a lot more difficult. Well, there's a lot more moving parts to work with, which is proving difficult now, but will come out great, I'm sure.
Yeah. Are you happy with the first book?
Yeah, I'm very happy with the first book, although, you know, my feelings about it will change as it goes out there and people react to it. Yeah. It's always weird with a book, you know, like if someone reviewed The Blade itself, I couldn't give a toss. Yeah. It's had hundreds of thousands of reviews. One or other.
People say about it now.
Yeah, it's not going to make the difference now. It's kind of, its reputation or lack thereof is sort of sealed. Yeah. But with a new book, you know, like this has, I think, 20 reviews on Goodreads at the moment, many of which are just people going, excited for this, haven't read it yet. So, you know, the first few reviews, and as the book comes out and there'll be a big rusher kind of reaction to it, at that point, you're very much walking on eggshells thinking, how will people respond to this?
Quite some way away. I mean, it's summer 25, isn't it? So
it's May, start of May.
It just feels like that must be, you know, I mean, obviously you've done this before, but that's quite a long period.
Well, I've never really done quite that before. No. I mean, because it has been a very big lead time with this. I think we just kind of committed to a date years in advance, really, almost as a placeholder. Yeah. And there's this kind of way in which, you know, once you've set a placeholder, the publishing schedules are often decided years out and takes on this kind of momentum of its own, and before you know it, you're stuck with that date. So it is a long advance, but I've got a new US publisher for this one, and in America they do like a lot of time to kind of get proofs out there, and it's a slower, more modular, kind of more slowly reacting industry there, really. So they've taken a lot of time to try and, you know, launch it out there. Fingers crossed it'll work.
So can I ask you one last question?
Of course,
I think it's one that people will be pretty interested in.
Okay.
Is, you know, do you see yourself writing in the First Law universe again? And if so, how would you imagine that?
Oh, can you ask that?
Yeah, I mean, I do see myself, you know, as I say, I don't see some dramatic end point that closes off the whole thing. So, I mean, readers do talk about, well, it's very open-ended, isn't it? I'm looking forward to the resolution.
Yeah. It's like, spoiler alert, the next one's
I'm not sure they're going to get a conclusion to everything in the way they might hope for. But I think they'll definitely, you know, I've always thought of it as a world I'd come back to, and it's kind of my primary world, really. So, and I've written a trilogy, 3 standalones in a trilogy, so I think the obvious thing is to do another 3 standalones. Then maybe another trilogy if I live that long.
Okay. Brilliant.
I mean, I don't know, my work rate has obviously dropped a little over time. Yeah. Because I kind of can't be arsed working as fast, and I've got a lot of other pots on the boil, so I don't know how long it'd take me to do that, and I'd probably intersperse it with other things. And, you know, if The Devils does supremely well, say, it's very difficult not to do more of that. You know? Or if The Shattered Sea got a TV adaptation, and, you know, the obvious thing would be to do another couple of those books. So events happen. There's no master plan, and we'll see what happens. But as I say, each time I end up asking, right, what am I going to do next? I mean, more First Law stuff is obviously always on the cards. I've got an idea for the next standalone.
Can you give us anything?
Transportation.
Okay.
You know, criminals being sent to Australia.
Yeah, like it.
That is kind of the shell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's criminals being sent from the Union to the New World. That's sort of the...
Oh, that sounds good.
That's the basic idea. But it's following the trajectory of magic starting to intrude back into the world a bit more. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks so much for your time, Joe.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for asking questions about me. I love talking about myself.
Favorite topic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.